The sun hung low in the dusty horizon as Rose Blackburn watched her life crumble before her eyes on what should have been the happiest day of her life. Standing alone in her wedding dress at the edge of Promise Creek, Wyoming Territory, 1876, the whispers behind her back had grown from hushed murmurs to thunderous judgment in the span of a single afternoon. "You have until sundown tomorrow to clear out." Mayor Fulton's voice was cold as the mountain streams that fed the valley. "This town has standards, Miss Blackburn, and being left at the altar is just the final straw in your list of indiscretions." Rose's fingers trembled as she clutched the tattered remains of her bridal bouquet, wildflowers now wilting in the late summer heat. Thomas Harrington, her fiancé of 8 months and the town's most eligible bachelor, had never arrived at the church. Instead, he'd sent his younger brother with a hastily scrawled note claiming he'd found Rose unsuitable after discovering rumors about her past. "Please," she whispered, her voice cracking. "My father's homestead belongs to the bank now," the mayor cut her off. "Your father's debts saw to that. Miss Blackburn, you've been nothing but trouble since you turned 18. The scandal with the schoolteacher 2 years ago, your father's gambling debts, and now this public humiliation. Promise Creek has had enough." 3 years earlier, Rose had been accused of seducing the married schoolteacher, though she'd done nothing more than tutor his children. The rumors had followed her like shadows, growing longer with each passing season. At 23, she was already considered a spinster by most, and Thomas had seemed her last chance at redemption. As the townsfolk dispersed, their judgment hanging in the air thicker than trail dust, Rose made her way to the small cabin she'd shared with her father until his death 6 months prior. With trembling hands, she packed the few possessions that truly belonged to her mother's silver hairbrush, a worn copy of Tennyson's poems, 2 dresses, and the small savings she'd managed to hide from her father's creditors. By dawn, Rose had nowhere to go but decided heading west toward the mountains might offer some salvation. Perhaps she could find work in one of the mining towns or make it all the way to California. Anything would be better than the shame of Promise Creek. The morning stagecoach refused to take her, the driver claiming to be full though only 3 passengers occupied the 6 seats. Rose began walking, her wedding dress exchanged for her plainest traveling skirt, her future as uncertain as the gathering clouds above. By midday, the skies opened up, and the rain soaked through Rose's clothes as she trudged along the muddy road. 5 miles out of town, she spotted an abandoned line shack nestled among a stand of pines. It wasn't much, just a single room with a stone fireplace, but it would provide shelter until the storm passed. Rose had just managed to start a small fire when hoofbeats approached. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Had someone from town come to drive her even further away? She grabbed the small knife from her pack, holding it tremulously as the door creaked open. A tall figure filled the doorway, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. In one hand he carried a saddlebag, in the other, surprisingly, a bunch of wildflowers tied with twine. "Miss Blackburn." His voice was deep but gentle, with a hint of a southern drawl. "I've been looking for you since dawn." He removed his hat, revealing sun-bronzed features and eyes the color of a summer sky. Rose had seen him before, watching from a distance during town gatherings, but they'd never spoken. He worked at the Morgan Ranch outside town, one of the cowhands who rarely ventured into Promise Creek except on paydays. "You're one of Mr. Morgan's men," she said cautiously, still gripping the knife. "Kyle Matthews, madam," he said, setting down his saddlebag but keeping a respectful distance. "And I reckon you might want to hear what I have to say before you decide whether to use that knife." Rose didn't lower the blade. "How did you find me? Tracked you?" "It's not hard in this mud," he replied, glancing down at his boots. "But I would have searched a lot longer if needed." He extended the flowers toward her, their petals vibrant against the drabness of the shack. "These are for you. And I've got news that might change everything you've been thinking about your situation." Hesitantly, Rose accepted the flowers, their sweet fragrance momentarily masking the mustiness of the abandoned shack. What news could possibly matter now? Kyle's expression darkened. Thomas Harrington never intended to marry you, Miss Blackburn. It was all part of a scheme to get your father's land. He removed a folded paper from his jacket. This is a letter from Thomas to Jasper Green at the bank. They've been working together, waiting for your father to die, then pushing you toward marriage while simultaneously spreading rumors to ensure you'd be ostracized if the wedding failed. Rose's knees weakened, and she sank onto the rough wooden chair by the fire. How did you get this? I've been keeping an eye on Harrington for months. Something about him never sat right with me. Kyle knelt to add wood to the struggling fire. I work for Mr. Morgan, yes, but I'm also sometimes employed by the territorial marshal when extra eyes are needed. There's been suspicious land grabs all through this valley. The fire crackled to life, casting flickering shadows across Kyle's face. Rose studied him, noting the quiet confidence in his movements, so different from Thomas's showy bravado. Even if what you say is true, it doesn't matter now, Rose whispered. I've been banished. My reputation is in tatters. That's the other part of my news. A smile tugged at the corner of Kyle's mouth. The marshal is riding into Promise Creek tomorrow with warrants for Thomas Harrington and Jasper Green. Their scheme extends beyond your father's land. They've been doing this to widows and single women across 3 counties. Hope fluttered in Rose's chest, but she tamped it down. The town will never accept me back. They've been looking for reasons to drive me out since. Since the schoolteacher claimed you tried to seduce him after his wife discovered his gambling debts, Kyle finished, surprising Rose. That story's about to be corrected, too. His wife has come forward with the truth. Rose stared at the flowers in her hands, her thoughts whirling. Why do you care what happens to me? We've barely exchanged 2 words before today. Kyle's gaze met hers, unwavering. Because I've watched you for 2 years, Miss Blackburn. I've seen how you help Mrs. Peterson with her children, though she's never been kind to you. How you tend your father's grave each Sunday, though he left you nothing but debt. How you face each day with dignity despite the whispers. He paused. Some things are worth fighting for, even from a distance. As night fell, the rain continued its steady rhythm on the roof. Kyle insisted on sleeping outside under the overhang while Rose took the shack's narrow cot. She lay awake for hours, the flowers beside her pillow, wondering if she dared believe in the possibility of redemption or in the quiet cowboy who'd ridden through a storm to bring her hope. Morning broke clear and bright. Kyle had coffee brewing over a small fire when Rose emerged from the shack. We should reach town by midday if we leave soon, he said, offering her a tin cup of the steaming liquid. My horse can carry us both. Rose hesitated. What if the marshal doesn't come? What if nothing changes? Kyle considered her question seriously. Then I'll take you wherever you want to go, Denver, California, even back east if that's your wish. But I believe in giving truth a chance to be heard first. His quiet confidence steadied her. As they rode toward Promise Creek, Rose sitting awkwardly sideways behind Kyle on his gelding, she found herself drawing strength from his solid presence. They crested the final hill overlooking the town just as a group of riders approached from the opposite direction. Kyle's posture straightened. That's Marshal Taggart and his deputies, right on time. Rose's heart pounded as they rode into town together, aware of curtains twitching and faces appearing in doorways. By the time they reached the main street, a crowd had begun to gather. Marshal Taggart's group arrived simultaneously, creating a sensation as they dismounted in front of the bank. Miss Blackburn, the marshal acknowledged her with a tip of his hat. Glad Matthews found you. I'll need your testimony after we conclude our business here. What followed was a scene Rose could scarcely have imagined. Thomas Harrington and Jasper Green were led from the bank in handcuffs as the marshal explained their scheme to the assembled townsfolk. Documents were produced showing how they had targeted vulnerable women throughout the territory, manipulating property transfers through false marriages or broken engagements. Mayor Fulton's face grew increasingly pale as the evidence mounted. When Mrs. Miller, the schoolteacher's wife, stepped forward to publicly clear Rose's name regarding the incident from years earlier, the mood of the crowd shifted perceptibly. "I should have spoken sooner," Mrs. Miller said, her voice carrying across the hushed street. "My husband claimed Rose had acted inappropriately to hide his gambling. I knew the truth but was too frightened to contradict him. I'm sorry, Rose." By late afternoon, Rose found herself in the unprecedented position of receiving apologies from townspeople who had shunned her just a day earlier. Mayor Fulton, thoroughly chastened, officially rescinded her banishment and announced that her father's property would be returned to her, as the bank's claim had been based on fraudulent documents. Through it all, Kyle remained quietly at her side, neither boasting about his role nor seeking recognition. When the formalities concluded and the crowd dispersed, Rose turned to him with wonder in her eyes. "How can I ever thank you?" Kyle shook his head. "No thanks needed." "Justice was long overdue. Will you be riding back to the Morgan Ranch now?" she asked, suddenly afraid of his departure. "That depends," he replied, his eyes searching hers. "Your land will need tending. The cabin needs repairs before winter." "I thought I might offer my services if you're agreeable." Rose felt a blush warm her cheeks. "I couldn't pay you properly, not right away." "I'm not asking for payment," Kyle said softly, "just permission to call on you properly. No schemes, no rumors, no expectations, just a chance to know you better." In that moment, standing in the golden afternoon light on a street that had witnessed her greatest humiliation just days before, Rose made a decision. "I think I'd like that very much, Mr. Matthews." Kyle's smile transformed his face, revealing a dimple in his left cheek. "Kyle, please." "Kyle," she repeated, liking how his name felt on her lips. "And I'm Rose." As summer faded into autumn, Kyle proved himself a man of his word. He helped Rose restore her father's homestead while continuing his work at the Morgan Ranch. 3 evenings a week, he would ride over after his duties were complete, sometimes bringing supplies, other times simply offering his company as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the distant mountains. Rose found herself looking forward to these visits with an intensity that both thrilled and frightened her. After the public betrayal by Thomas, she had sworn to guard her heart more carefully, yet Kyle's steady presence was slowly dismantling her defenses. On a crisp October evening, as they sat shelling peas on the porch, Rose finally asked the question that had been on her mind for weeks. "Why did you really come looking for me that day, the whole truth this time?" Kyle's hands stilled. "You want the unvarnished truth," Rose nodded. "I'd been watching you for nearly 2 years, he admitted. "Not in any improper way," he hastened to add, "but I noticed you. How could I not? You carried yourself with such dignity despite everything." He set the bowl of peas aside. "When I heard about the wedding, it hit me harder than I expected. I told myself if Harrington made you happy, I'd wish you well and move on." "But you were investigating him already," Rose prompted. Kyle nodded. "The marshal had suspicions about several land transactions. I volunteered to keep an eye on things in Promise Creek. When I discovered what they were planning, I nearly confronted Harrington directly, but that would have jeopardized the larger investigation." He looked away, his profile strong against the darkening sky. "The day before your wedding, I received confirmation from the marshal about the warrants being prepared. I rode out to tell you, to warn you, but when I arrived in town, I learned Harrington had already sent his note. By the time I found out you'd been banished, you were gone." Rose's heart quickened. "You're saying you would have stopped the wedding?" "I'm saying I couldn't bear the thought of you marrying a man who didn't treasure you as you deserve," Kyle said quietly. "Even if that meant watching you build a life with someone worthy of you instead." The honesty in his voice moved Rose deeply. Impulsively, she reached for his hand, her fingers twining with his calloused ones. "I'm glad it was you who found me." Kyle's eyes met hers, hope and restraint battling in their blue depths. "Rose, I don't want to rush you. After everything you've been through, sometimes," she interrupted gently. "A person knows their own mind quite clearly." She squeezed his hand. And heart. The kiss that followed was nothing like the calculated, passionless embrace Thomas had once pressed upon her. Kyle's lips were gentle yet certain, conveying a depth of feeling that made Rose's breath catch. When they finally parted, the stars had emerged overhead, twinkling witnesses to the moment. As winter blanketed Promise Creek in snow, Rose and Kyle's courtship became the town's favorite topic of conversation, though this time, the whispers held warmth rather than malice. Mrs. Peterson, once among Rose's harshest critics, now regularly invited the couple for Sunday dinners. Even Mayor Fulton made a point of greeting Rose respectfully whenever their paths crossed. By Christmas, Kyle had officially moved into the small cabin on Rose's property, though they maintained separate households, he in the cabin, she in the main house, to preserve propriety. Together, they expanded the garden, added 2 milk cows and a flock of chickens, and repaired the fence line that had fallen into disrepair during her father's final years. On Christmas Eve, a knock at Rose's door revealed Kyle standing in the swirling snow, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "I thought we were meeting at the church for services," Rose said, inviting him in from the cold. We are," he stammered, removing his hat. "But I wanted to speak with you first." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object wrapped in a handkerchief. "This belonged to my grandmother. My mother gave it to me before she passed, saying I should save it for the right moment." Rose's heart began to race as Kyle carefully unwrapped a delicate gold ring with a small pearl set among tiny leaves. "It's not diamonds or anything fancy," he said apologetically, "but it's been in my family for 3 generations." "It's beautiful," Rose whispered, tears pricking her eyes. Kyle took a deep breath. "Rose Blackburn, this past year has been the happiest of my life. I know it's only been 6 months since I found you in that lined shack, but I've loved you far longer than that." He knelt before her, the ring held carefully between his fingers. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Rose's thoughts flashed back to the day of her failed wedding, to the shame and despair she'd felt. How different this moment was, not a public spectacle designed to fulfill social expectations, but an intimate question asked with genuine love. "Yes," she said, her voice steady and sure. "Nothing would make me happier." The church bells were ringing for Christmas Eve service as they arrived hand in hand, Rose's grandmother's ring glinting in the lantern light. Pastor Williams smiled knowingly when they approached him after the service and requested a private word. "I had a feeling this might be coming," he said warmly. "When would you like to hold the ceremony?" Kyle looked at Rose questioningly. "Spring would be traditional," he suggested. Rose thought of the homestead, of the life they were already building together. "What about New Year's Day?" She countered. "I don't want to wait for spring, and it would be a wonderful way to begin the year." Kyle's face lit up. "New Year's Day would be perfect," Pastor Williams chuckled. "New Year's Day it is, then, a fresh start in more ways than one." News of their engagement spread quickly through Promise Creek. Unlike the elaborate preparations for her wedding to Thomas, which had been largely orchestrated by others to meet their expectations, Rose found herself genuinely enjoying the simple arrangements for her marriage to Kyle. Mrs. Peterson and several other women helped her alter her mother's wedding dress, which Rose had discovered carefully preserved in a trunk in the attic. The ivory silk was outdated by current fashion standards, but became something special with their loving attention. "Much more suited to you than that fussy thing Harrington's mother insisted upon," Mrs. Peterson declared as Rose stood for a final fitting. "You look like yourself in this, only more so." The day before the wedding, an unexpected visitor arrived at the homestead. Marshal Taggart rode up just as Rose was feeding the chickens, tipping his hat politely as he dismounted. "Miss Blackburn, I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Marshal. Kyle's out checking the north pasture fence but should be back shortly." The marshal nodded, then reached into his saddlebag. "I've brought something for you, a wedding gift of sorts, though it's really just returning what's rightfully yours." He handed her an official-looking document. The court has finished processing the case against Harrington and Green. This is the formal deed to your property, fully cleared of all false claims and debts. There's also compensation for damages, which the judge awarded from Harrington's assets. Rose stared at the document, then at the bank draft attached to it. The amount was more than she'd ever possessed. This is overwhelming. It's justice, Miss Blackburn, long overdue. The marshal shifted awkwardly. There's something else you should know. Thomas Harrington will be released from territorial custody next month. His sentence was reduced in exchange for testimony against larger land swindling operations. Rose felt a moment of tension, then surprising calm. Thank you for telling me, but his return doesn't frighten me anymore. Good, the marshal said approvingly. You've built something solid here, something honest. That's worth more than all Harrington's schemes could ever amount to. After the marshal departed, Rose stood on the porch, watching the winter sun glint off the snow-covered fields. The land stretched before her, no longer a burden of debt and painful memories, but a foundation for the future. When Kyle returned, she showed him the documents and the bank draft. We could expand the herd, he said thoughtfully. Maybe add that second well you've been wanting. Or, Rose suggested, a new idea taking shape, we could set aside some of it. For a school, Kyle raised an eyebrow. A school? Promise Creek School is too far for children from outlying farms, Rose explained, her enthusiasm growing. We have enough land to donate a parcel near the crossroads. It would serve families from 3 directions who currently can't send their children regularly. The pride in Kyle's eyes made Rose's heart swell. I think that's a fine idea, he said, drawing her into his arms. A way to build something good from what was meant for harm. New Year's Day dawned clear and bracingly cold. Unlike her previous wedding day, Rose awoke with a sense of peaceful certainty. Mrs. Peterson and 2 other women helped her dress, their chatter filling the bedroom with warmth and laughter. No going back now, Mrs. Peterson teased as she pinned the simple veil to Rose's upswept hair. That cowboy of yours has been up since before dawn, looking like he might jump out of his skin with anticipation. Good, Rose smiled, because I have no intention of going back, only forward. The church was filled with people not just from Promise Creek, but from surrounding homesteads and ranches as well. Kyle stood at the altar, his usually wind-burned face clean-shaven and solemn. When Rose appeared at the back of the church on the arm of Mr. Peterson, who had offered to give her away, Kyle's expression transformed into one of such unguarded joy that murmurs of approval rippled through the congregation. Their vows were straightforward, spoken clearly, and from the heart. When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, Kyle's kiss was tender but carried a promise that made Rose blush beneath her veil. The celebration afterward was held in the town hall, with tables groaning under the weight of dishes contributed by every family in attendance. Mayor Fulton himself proposed the first toast, his words a public acknowledgement of how the town had wronged Rose and a blessing for the couple's future. As evening approached and the party showed no signs of diminishing, Kyle leaned close to Rose's ear. Ready to slip away, Mrs. Matthews. The name sent a thrill through her. More than ready, Mr. Matthews. They made their escape amid cheers and well wishes, riding back to the homestead in a wagon decorated with evergreen boughs and ribbons by the children of Promise Creek. The main house had been transformed in their absence. Fresh candles lit every room. A fire blazed in the hearth, and someone had scattered pine boughs and winter berries across the tables and mantel. Welcome home, Kyle said, lifting Rose from the wagon and carrying her across the threshold despite her laughing protests. Later, as they lay entwined in the quiet darkness of the bedroom that was now truly theirs to share, Rose traced the line of Kyle's jaw with gentle fingers. I never thought I could be this happy, she confessed. After everything that happened, I'd convinced myself that love wasn't meant for me. Kyle caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. Maybe we had to weather those storms to find our way here. I'm just grateful we did. Do you know what today is besides our wedding day? Rose asked. Kyle thought for a moment. New Year's Day? It's exactly 6 months since you found me in that lined shack, she said softly. 6 months since you rode in with flowers and news that changed everything. Kyle pulled her closer, his voice husky with emotion. Best day of my life until today. Spring brought new life to the homestead. The garden flourished under Rose's care, and the foundation was laid for the schoolhouse on the donated parcel of land. Kyle had proven himself not just a skilled ranch hand, but a natural businessman, negotiating favorable contracts for their expanding herd and establishing relationships with markets as far away as Denver. As April turned to May, Rose confirmed what she'd suspected for several weeks: their family would be expanding by winter. When she told Kyle, his whoops of joy brought their nearest neighbors running, thinking something was amiss. Thomas Harrington did indeed return to Promise Creek that summer, though he didn't stay long. He avoided Rose and Kyle entirely, selling his remaining property to a cattle company before heading further west. His departure barely registered in Rose's consciousness, occupied as she was with her thriving marriage and preparing for their child. By the time snow again blanketed Promise Creek, Rose and Kyle Matthews had become one of the most respected families in the region. The small school near their property opened with 12 students from previously underserved homesteads. Rose occasionally taught there when the regular schoolmistress needed assistance, finding unexpected fulfillment in helping children learn. Their daughter, Emma Grace Matthews, arrived on a December night with her father's blue eyes and her mother's determined spirit. As Kyle cradled his newborn daughter, watching his exhausted but radiant wife, he marveled at how completely his life had changed in less than 2 years. "She's perfect," he whispered, carefully returning the swaddled infant to Rose's arms, just like her mother. Rose smiled, tired but triumphant. "She's the best of both of us, I think." She looked around their bedroom at the home they'd built together. "Sometimes I can hardly believe this is real, that all of this came from that terrible day when I thought my life was over." Kyle sat beside them on the bed, his arm encircling Rose's shoulders. "That day wasn't an ending. It was the beginning we were meant to have." Outside, snow fell softly on the land that had once represented Rose's shame and burden, now transformed into the foundation of their shared dreams. Promise Creek continued its life in the valley below, its people no longer sources of judgment but a community that had learned, however belatedly, to recognize true worth. As Emma drifted to sleep in her mother's arms, Rose leaned her head against Kyle's shoulder, overwhelmed with gratitude for the cowboy who had ridden through a storm with wildflowers and news, changing the course of her life forever. What had begun with banishment had led to belonging deeper than she'd ever known, not just to a place or a community, but to the man beside her and the child they'd created together. "I love you, Kyle Matthews," she whispered, his arms tightened around her. "And I love you, Rose Matthews. Yesterday, today, and all our tomorrows."